had so many pages on it. But just as in the West, the Crusades generally, if one thinks of movies like Kingdom of Heaven, or the novels, right, there are always novels, tons of historical novels written about the Crusades. The Crusades tend to be portrayed in a positive sense, or in a kind of romantic, romantic with a capital R sense, as this, this great romantic adventure of brave Christian knights going off to rescue the Holy Land, filled with pomp and pageantry and daring do and things like that. So we tend to over-romanticize them. They tend to demonize them. The truth is somewhere in between. Okay. So to get us going on the subject here, I brought in some toys today. In honor of the occasion, I put them in my Vatican bag. So, but I took a look at at the syllabus, which is terrific. I'd love to take this course. But there were two books that I know of and that I love very much that aren't on the syllabus. And so while I assume Michael's familiar with them, but you might not be. In terms of a history of Jerusalem, this one by Joshua Prower is terrific. It's part of a series, but this deals simply with the Islamic period from 638 up to 1099. Each chapter is written by a different author. So it's similar to some of the books that are on your syllabus, but it's really fantastic. It does a great job. So I thought I'd actually just pass this around.
Thank you.
And then there are a number of histories of the Crusades nowadays available somewhere on the syllabus. The Malouf book is on your syllabus, of the one called The Crusades Through Arab Eyes. That's an old standby. It's a famous one, and it's good. It's good. There's another book that's much better, but I can never assign it in my classes because even the paperback costs $85, and I'm always tempted to assign it just so that I can get extra copies for free, but I can't live with myself if I do that. So instead, I just trumpet the book and urge you all to buy it on Amazon next time you have $85 lying around. This is by a Scottish woman named Carol Hillenbrand. And what makes this so good is that Carol is one of the very few medieval historians who can read Arabic. Histories of the Crusades tend to be written by medieval European historians who are very good at Latin, and some are fairly good at Greek. But I can count of living Western Crusade historians, I can count on two hands those who can actually read Arabic. And so what Carol has done here is she has assumed that the Western interpretation of the Crusades is well known. So she doesn't bother to give the entire narration of how the Europeans developed this notion and how, what happened on each of the subsequent Crusades. She just assumes that's a given. So you don't want this to be the first thing you read. But after you've read a general history of the Crusades, then you want to pick up this one. And it's based entirely on Arabic sources. Now, one of the challenges, of course, is that with the exception of the Arabs, the Muslims who are writing in this part of the world, there aren't a lot of Arab sources, or Arabic sources, because the Crusades didn't really register through the rest of the Islamic world. And so a lot of what she has done, and part of what makes this so valuable, is that she deals with those chronicle materials. But she has found out, she's discovered individual letters, inscriptions on mosques or on school buildings, paintings, all kinds of the kinds of materials that lots of historians might not think to look at. And it's profusely illustrated. It's a lovely book. So this came out about 10 years ago. I'll send this one this direction. But it's these are two really splendid books. I encourage you at some point to take copies of them. Okay. Now I believe you read Urban II's speech in class, or it's on the website.
It's on, yeah.
Right? The speech that he gives in November 1095 to launch the Crusades. One of the things that surprises people And if I have a criticism of the Hillenbrand book, it's that she also doesn't focus on this as much as she should, which is I argue in my book that it's a mistake to look at the Crusades solely as a religious conflict. Obviously, we have this other sort of economic structural element that has to be taken into account. But there's a third element that no one that I know of has so far taken account of, and neither does Hillenbrand in her book, which is the ethnic angle on this. If you have read Urban's speech, or if you want to go off and look at it again, it's clear that while he makes certain misidentifications, what he describes is, he refers to a race among the Persians, or a race from among the Persians, who have now entered into the Holy Land and are committing all sorts of atrocities. And this is what requires some kind of collective action in order to save the Christians who are being persecuted in the Holy Land. What he's referring to are the Turks. From the very start, now we can't put ourselves in the minds of the average soldier on the crusade. Several of them wrote letters back home to their wives and things like that. But certainly what we know of what was in the minds of the leadership, the crusade of 1095, which goes until 1099, it was not thought of as a war upon Islam. Muslims, after all, this part of the world had been under Muslim control for 400 years by this point. So there was nothing. There was not like it was a sudden emergency. Muslims are in charge of the Christians. Muslims are in control of Jerusalem and Bethlehem and all the different Christian holy sites. That was not so much an issue. Neither was it a war against the Arabs. All of the references that are specific are references to the Turks. And we have, just as sort of confirmation of that, here's another brief text. By the time the First Crusade ended, Urban II, the Pope who had called the Crusade, was dead. He had died shortly before the Crusade ended. And when the Crusaders came back to Rome and announced to the Pope that they had achieved victory, it was a different Pope. His name is Pascal II. And what you have at the top of the page is, this is his letter announcing the great victory of the First Crusade. So, Pascal, bishop, servant of the servants of God, to all archbishops, bishops, and abbots throughout Gaul, greeting and apostolic blessing. First of all, notice who this announcement is sent to. It's sent to the church. It's not sent to any political figure. We owe boundless gratitude to the compassion of Almighty God, since in our time he has deigned to wrest the church in Asia from the bands of the Turks, and to open to Christian soldiers the very city of the Lord's suffering and burial. However, we ought to follow divine grace with what means he has given us, and effectively aid our brethren who have remained in those districts, which were once the lands of the peoples of Palestine or Canaan. Urge, therefore, all the soldiers of your region to strive for remission and forgiveness of their sins by hastening to our Mother Church of the East. Especially compel those who have assumed the sign of the cross in pledge of this journey to hasten thither, unless they are prevented by the hindrance of poverty. Moreover, we decree that those be held in disgrace who left the siege of Antioch through weak or questionable faith. That was one of the earlier sieges of the First Crusade. A number of crusaders actually gave up and fled and returned back home. Let them remain in excommunication unless they affirm with certain pledges that they will return. We therefore command that all their possessions be restored to those brethren who are returning after the victory of the Lord, just as you recall was ordained in a synodal decree by Urban, our predecessor of blessed memory. Do thus in all matters, being so zealous in your duty, that by common zeal our Mother Church of the East may be restored to her due state, the Lord granting it. So here too, the Turks were the enemy. And so we need to back up a little bit and take a look at what was happening ethnically in the region that today we call the Middle East. Now, obviously, what one has is in the 7th century, with the beginnings of the great revelations to the prophet, is we have Muhammad and his band of followers coming up after they have subdued the entire peninsula, and then rising up into the Holy Land, and ultimately, of course, building this enormous empire, which stretches from India all the way to Portugal by the year, say, 750, more or less. They have this enormous empire. But what one has with this empire, it looks tremendously impressive when you draw it on a map, but it's remarkably weak, because all positions of political authority and all positions of military command, all positions of religious authority, and all positions of economic authority were monopolized by the Arabs who had led the conquest. So in other words, what the Islamic Empire represents is a massive state made up of millions of people who themselves are made up of hundreds of different ethnicities from one end to another, over which there is a microscopically thin overlayer of ethnically Arab leaders. And during the years of the Umayyad Caliphate, of course, they began the process of Islamizing the population. Now, it took several centuries, but eventually, Islam is adopted by the majority of the population. And as I'm sure you know, that Islam from the very start, it preached the idea of religious toleration towards Christians and Jews. Christians and Jews being sort of the spiritual ancestors or the older brothers, so to speak, of Islam. That as long as